So welcome everyone. My name is Julie and I am the Community Relations Coordinator for Altman Hospital. I do have the pleasure of introducing Barb Fordyce today. And she's going to be talking about from stress to strength. Just a little bit about Barb. Barb has expertise and experience in the field of psychology in all facets of human growth and development. She's given her a very comprehensive perspective on issues of our time. During her years of private practice, she's seen numerous clients and supervised many other practitioners. Dr. Fordyce is a consultant for many corporations and organizations, providing consultation, executive coaching, team building, and so many other things. So we're so happy to have you, Barb, join us today. And so I will turn it over to you and we can get started. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Julie. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. And I think that the topic probably originally was holiday stress or something like living well in stressful times. And I've shifted it to another presentation I've been doing, which is from stress to strength, because this is down to 1/2 hour, which is what we've got from a time frame. When we're doing a Zoom talk, I think a lot of times a half an hour is just about as much as anybody is interested in listening. So here we are, and I think that each and every one of us can really identify with the fact that right now is an extremely stressful time of life. We've had pretty much a perfect storm in terms of COVID that has certainly taken us by storm, and it's unprecedented. None of us have ever lived in a time like this. In addition, then we've had a lot of challenges in terms of an election, social change, social issues, just so very, very much. And now we're also entering into the holiday season. In fact, we started obviously with Thanksgiving, and that all too has changed. And typically in a calendar year, holidays are very stressful. And without question, that stress is a part of this holiday time, but probably more particularly because we won't be doing much of anything the same way that we always have. And so it adds an additional stressor. So first I want to talk just a touch about stress and kind of where we are with all of that. Going to take me a minute. Hans Selye was a psychologist, and he was probably the first one who talked in great detail about stress in the human condition. And he came up with a general adaptation syndrome to explain it, talking about the 3 steps. And that first, we've all talked about the fight or flight response. And that's, when our bodies really go into an alarm. And if there were a lion right now walking toward me, my body would activate itself. I wouldn't have to say, hey, body, activate yourself. It would do it naturally. And I would probably fly in the house, or fight, which is doubtful. So I think that, first and foremost, that is a beautiful thing. And it just occurs naturally without us having to activate it. The longer stress goes on, we hit a resistance stage. And that's where the body begins to adapt to the ongoing stressor. So if it's a stressor of a lengthier period of time, like COVID, then our body begins to adapt. At first we find out, and we were all fearful, overwhelmed information coming out. And then as time went on, we started to adapt a little bit more to, okay, this is going to go on for a while. We're dealing with COVID and it's going to mean changes. But as it goes on for a pretty protracted time, we shift into the exhaustion stage. And that's where a lot of folks are finding themselves right now. Mental health, without question, is being taxed. Private practices are, hospitals are, community mental health is, because so many people are so drained from this ongoing stress that adds just yet another huge layer to an already stressful life. In the exhaustion stage, the body is drained of all resources to manage the stressor, and we simply break down and cannot cope. And unfortunately, then what happens is that chronic stress develops. And so that exhaustive phase will as it goes on and on and on, when that response to stress is repeatedly and chronically provoked, especially by fears rather than physical threats, which again, right now, it's fear. There's such a fear factor about all of this. Then the results can be disastrous to our healths. And we all know, we have read this. This is information we're quite well aware of, but that repeated stress can produce physiologic changes that contribute to digestive and sleeping issues, cardiovascular issues, and diminished immunity. So it is critical that we try to do what we can to bring our level of stress down. And that's really primarily what I want to talk about in the remaining time. In terms of the research that has been out there for years and years, when we talk about traumatic events and we talk about coping, there are three things in the literature that come up. They pop up all of the time. And the first one is managing what we can control. Now, we know there's so much we can't control in life. We can't control that a COVID virus found its way to the United States, to the world. We can't control that, but we can control our own reaction to it. And that's the stuff that we have to remember. There's so many life events we have no control over, but we've got to try to do what we can to control what we can. And that's the first hallmark step of coping. Second thing is adequate information. And this one's a tough one because there's so much information out there and it's hard to assess sometimes what's accurate, what's not accurate. I think the CDC is an exceptional place to go for information. Certainly our health department, the Ohio Department of Health, any very bona fide places that can provide us with really what they know at this point. And one wonderful piece of information, and I think this really allows us to do what we can control, and you'll see it in signs around town. I think they're still probably up on billboards, but they're in a lot of literature for Altman Hospital. And it is that there are things we can do. We can wash up, so we know sanitizing our hands is really critical in reducing the spread of the virus. We can mask up because we know there is much less potential to get it or spread it that way. We can back up so that we maintain social distance of at least 6 feet or greater. And we can boost up, which is get the flu vaccine and then potentially, hopefully, when the vaccine is available for most of us, we can boost up yet again with the vaccine. So as I was reading this morning, I think the vaccine is going to show itself in Stark County and in Ohio a little bit later this month. And Altman is one of the sites and that vaccine will go first to frontline workers, to nursing homes, to those whose environment certainly is much more significant in the potential for spread of COVID. And the third thing, the third hallmark of coping is social support. Without a doubt, we need others, we need connectedness, even if it's virtually. I mean, the first time I did a virtual meeting with my office, I was so thrilled because I hadn't seen them together for months. And I would see maybe we would be in a meeting or we'd be masked and well over 6 feet apart and chat for a few moments in the office, but to have all those faces there and for me to be able to engage with all of them was terrific. And subsequently, I have been doing more virtual with my pals. As a couple, we do it with our friends, because just to have that sense, even if it's virtual, that we have some companionship, some comfort to say, how are you doing, to see a face, can be extremely helpful in coping. So I wanted to give you something that was short, sweet, and simple. But basically, when we talk from stress to strength, I took the acronym STRONG to talk about self-talk, which is critical, tuning into mindfulness, a great stress reduction, resilience and building resilience, which is critical, optimism, having a great outlook, nature, and I gave you a little bit of a depiction here today, and good health habits. So we'll start first with self-talk. In a real sense, in our thinking, we're either in the construction business or the wrecking business. And basically, we want to stay in the construction business, which means trying not to allow ourselves to become too emotional in our thinking that we say, my gosh, this will never end. I'll never get everything done that I need to get done today. Whatever it is, those kind of all or nothing thinking things that we can do that can really lead to us feeling defeated before we begin. So we want to try to shift more from emotional thinking, from the wrecking business to the construction business of thinking about rational thinking. Okay, this is clearly a different holiday season. We will not be with our kids this year. It'll be the first time. And we'll virtually be with them, and we certainly will share in seeing them just as soon as it's safe to do so. But it will be something very, very different. And so I think we say things like, this will be a different year, but we'll figure out how we can best manage this particular year. I would like to be doing X, Y, Z. I'm going to try to figure out what can I do that will be as close of an approximation and bring me joy. So I think we shift from it being all or nothing, everything's awful, to boy, if only it were just like it used to be, everything would be great, to some variation in between where it's more rational, focusing on flexible problem solving versus negative emotions and irrational beliefs. So I think during this season, trying to come up with plans that will bring you joy, trying to come up with ways that, filling the house with music, watching some of the shows that are lighter, and finding the laughter, finding the joy, or spiritual that are deep in meaning for you. But I think trying to change the focus to those things that can be stress reducing and comforting. And then making plans with goals and utilizing prior learned successful coping strategies to achieve goals. We all have a track record of coping, and sometimes we forget that in the midst of when we're really feeling overwhelmed. We all have coped well in certain situations, and one of the best things to think about is, when I was coping at my best, what exactly was I doing? Well, in all likelihood, I was probably taking pretty good care of myself, getting adequate sleep, eating well, those kinds of things, but I was probably trying to think a little out of the box. And I think we have to remind ourselves and reward ourselves for our successful coping, and remind ourselves that we are able and capable, and we want to develop an optimistic core belief that we are capable of coping and coping effectively through this time. The next one is tuning in mindfully, and I love dogs, as you can see, even though I put my Labrador in the house so that she wouldn't bark at every boat that went by. But we want to tune in mindfully, as this dog is, with a yoga pose. And really what that means is we want to spend more time in the moment. We want to capture the joy that does occur in each and every moment of life when we look for it. And we just want to be more fully aware of what is going on. And this little exercise can be extremely helpful in doing that. And basically it's stop. S is for stop. Take a breath. And I'd urge you to take more than one. And you might think about breathing into account of, there's 4, 7, 8 is a big one. Breathing into account of 4, holding it for 7 seconds, breathing out 8. There's box breathing, which is a fairly new concept, which is pretty cool. And you breathe in for 6 seconds, breathe out for 6 seconds, breathe in for 6 seconds, and breathe out for 6 seconds. So it makes a box. So you breathe around the box. And when we start to just focus on taking a breath, breathing in, kind of observing that breath a bit, just being aware of our critical bodily function, it will allow us to stop for a moment and observe. So the third step we want to do is just observe. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? And I would even say that think about trying this week, because it's a pretty fascinating thing. When we do this exercise and we observe, just observing even what your body feels like. Because sometimes we're just pretty tensed up and our shoulders are up close to our ears. And so think about, ooh, is my body relaxed? And can I relax it a bit? And just observe Am I hungry? Do a body scan. What's my body telling me about how I feel? And then proceed. And during the observation, we find out what's happening, including our own thoughts, emotions, and sensations. And then we can reconnect with the experience and proceed and respond much more effectively. Another thing I wanted to add to this slide is the 5 C's of resilient coping. This is Linda Graham's work, and it makes so much sense to all of us. We know these things, but sometimes it's just really helpful to be reminded. Calm, staying calm in a crisis, because it's out of calm that we can be strong. Clarity, learning to have clear cognitive appraisals of what is happening, and awareness from the emotions produced, seeing the possibilities from different perspectives in order to respond flexibly. So when we stay more cognitive or rational, we get more clarity about, well, what can I do? You know, I can't do this, and this, but what can I do? And we can really, when we stay calm, allow that clarity to help us find some ways that we can operate that we feel better about. Connection, learning to reach out to others for help and connecting to other resources when we need to expand our options. Competence, learning to call on the coping skills and competencies that have been learned from previous experience and make realistic plans to act quickly and effectively. Sometimes in the middle of a crisis, especially when we're feeling tremendously overwhelmed, it's easy to forget that we have coped and coped very effectively many times throughout our lives. And I think one of the things we want to do in a moment of observation and reflection is to remember, I have the capacity to cope. It's within me, and I have done it before. And I want to call on it. I want to rely on it. I want to calm myself to remind myself, I am capable of doing this. And then finally, having the courage, learning to strengthen confidence and faith that you can persevere in coping until coming to some kind of resolution, whatever that may be, or acceptance of the difficulty. And then optimism. And basically, there's been so very, very much research on optimism. Psychologists love to call it now positivity, but whatever we're going to call it, basically it is to have a more optimistic perspective by simply learning a set of skills about how to talk to yourself while navigating life challenges. We can all learn to speak to ourselves about our life circumstances from a more encouraging viewpoint. The goal is to increase control over how we view and interpret life episodes. So basically, when in our self-talk we're saying, this is difficult, but I can figure out some ways to make it better for myself. This is challenging, but I know that there are some things I can do to assure that I'm going to be coping more effectively. We can speak to ourselves about those life circumstances in more of an encouraging way to feel more optimistic about the control piece of what we can and cannot do. And why would we want positivity or optimism or whatever we want to call it? Well, it feels good, builds good mental habits, psychological strengths, social connections, can transform our future, puts the brakes on negativity, and it actually obeys a tipping point. So if we're trying to ultimately raise our level of positivity, what we want to look at is 3-to-1 ratio, 3 of positive kinds of things versus 1 of negative. And so again, thinking about that, thinking about our daily lives and our environment, how can I boost that positivity? In what way can I elevate my positivity and try to make the ratio in my day about 3-to-1? We can increase it, it broadens and builds, and it builds physical health. And all of that has been demonstrated in the research over and over and over and over again. I just don't want to bore you with the literature. Nature. So we all know this. And this is a little bit challenging in Ohio in the wintertime. But still, there's some beauty out there. Some days it's hard to see, but it's honestly, it is out there. Even if we're looking at, animals at play, or we're watching to see What is happening? The snow is beautiful. I mean, there's just no question about it, or a sunset or a sunrise. But people who spend 20 minutes or more outside when the weather is good experience a boost in positivity and have more expansive and open thinking. And you think about it, I think it's absolutely true because it draws our attention involuntarily and it reminds us of the vastness in the universe, provides sufficient scope and richness to fully occupy our attention. I think on an evening that I look up, and if it's a clear evening and I see the stars and I see the planets, it's just, I mean, the vastness of the universe is so great that it's hard not to be in awe. And I think we need to remind ourselves with regularity about the beauty that is out there, the nature, the awe, and even to take a look at something, a budding flower, a poinsettia. They're out there in full force right now. They're gorgeous, but just to see the little bits and pieces, the intricacy and the beauty of nature. Studies show that people can put themselves on healing trajectories by spending time outdoors and connecting to nature. Good health habits. I can't see my headings, so I'm guessing at them, but I think that's what that one is. Good health habits. And here's where we have a tremendous amount of control. To plan our personal and family goals and prioritize self-care activities. Stick as closely as we can to our previous routines. If we're working at home, try to create a separate workplace to avoid the boundary blurring. And I would say that too, that even that you can find and create kind of a fun zone in your house that, that's where we're going to go relax in the evening. And we do at our house, we have been following a rule because it's really easy when you're working virtually to just make it all day and all night virtual working. And so we both have agreed that we turn it off. And it's usually 5 o'clock. It's like, okay, we shut it down. And so we will use our computers for, virtual social kinds of things. We'll, stream a movie. We'll do that kind of thing. But the rest of it waits till tomorrow morning unless it's an emergency. And sometimes if we can just create a boundary that, okay, this is the end of the day, everything focuses now more on lightness, entertainment, music, taking a walk, having a nice nourishing dinner, thinking more in terms of good health habits. Don't skimp on the self-care basics. Eat healthy food, get enough sleep, and exercise regularly. This is a really interesting thing. And in private practice, we tell people that even when there is a need for antidepressant medication or anxiety meds, the best thing that somebody can do is get outside and move. And since antidepressants generally take a while to take effect, this is the absolute best thing that anyone can do. 10 minutes a day is sufficient to produce the effect. 30 is optimal. And so moving. And if it's too unpleasant outdoors, move inside. You can dance. I've done more dancing probably during COVID than all of my life. And not necessarily when others are around. A lot of times it's when I'm just here and I'm doing stuff. I'm in the kitchen and I do a little kitchen dance. Whatever it takes, but move. It's critical. Other things under good health habits, practicing mindfulness and other relaxation techniques, meditation, prayer, yoga, mindful breathing. It's out there on video too. We can find things that help really encourage us. And we can find a lot of books. I've done a lot of ordering on Amazon, like most people, and I've loaded my Kindle with inspiring things to read. And so I think we can find a calming piece and make sure we have those things around us. I would imagine many of you can identify with this, but some of the early evenings, and sometimes it still happens when I wake up in the middle of the night and think about all the things that are concerning. I will have by my side some things that bring me peace. And if I need to read them because I'm just really having a hard time focusing, I will. And to bring myself back to being mindful, focusing on the moment, I pray, do meditation, and breathe. And generally speaking, it can settle me down enough to try to fall back to sleep. spend time usually involved with traveling by learning new things. I've just thought recently, you know what? Technologically, I'm so unsophisticated. I'm getting better, but I thought, okay, this is my year. I'm really gonna make sure that I can handle everything. And then probably I'm going to forget it all and never use it after COVID's over. But I thought this really would be a great year to understand more of the things that happen on my iPhone. I thought about getting an Apple Watch for exercise. I have a Garmin and it's so much less sophisticated. And I thought, boy, that's a learning curve. That might be too high for me. But thinking about learning new things and thinking about, you know, what have I always thought might be fun to do? I love to cook. So I'll do a cooking show. And actually, I think my sister and my niece and I talk virtually every Wednesday. And so I did a cooking demonstration for them. And they laughed so hard. I mean, it was pretty funny. I'm kind of like a Julia Childs in the kitchen making big messes everywhere. But I like to watch cooking shows and I like to watch demonstrations to try to learn. And it's a good thing, but there's so much out there to learn. And I think we need to think about that as an option. Maintain strong relationships and get help when needed. Practice forgiveness of ourselves and others in isolated conditions particularly. We can't always be at our best and everybody's seeing us most of the time. Be aware of symptoms of stress, burnout, and compassion fatigue, and develop emotional control and keep a long-term perspective, seeing stressful events in a broader context. I would really urge you all to focus more on nature and inspiring things and steer clear as much as you can of media. Because if it bleeds, it leads. And that's their rule of thumb for news broadcasting. Folks who watch TV a lot view our world as much more violent than it really is. They overestimate it grossly. People who watch less are more accurate judges of the degree of risk we may all encounter. Negativity grabs our attention, it draws us in and keeps us watching, so limit it. Make sure that you just do the necessary parts just to keep yourself informed and choose your stations wisely in terms of what they're presenting, because some of them really love to sensationalize. I've always thought, wouldn't it be absolutely cool if we could have a news station that had 24-hour good news event broadcasting? Because there is more good out there happening in the world each and every day than there is bad. But we don't see that. We can't balance out the news. But boy, I don't know. That would be just amazing if we could see it. So we have to remind ourselves of all the good that is out there, all the good deeds, all the things that are much more significant and really truly matter in the world. Social support. I'm an animal lover, you can see. My puppy dog. The correlation between flourishing and enjoying good social relationships is so strong and reliable that scientists have called it a necessary condition for flourishing. In other words, it's probably the most significant indicator for health promotion. So much so that people who have a strong social support network are 95% less likely to become depressed. It's huge, absolutely huge. And it doesn't have to be we have a bundle of friends. It just means we have friends, we have close relationships. Simply being with others, whether you know them well or not, is even an extraordinarily reliable way to increase your positivity. Not in person right now, but even, again, at a distance or virtually. Social support's a necessary factor in developing resilience and coping skills. And finally, I would urge you all to take a sauna, set realistic goals for yourself, accept your limits as a human being, unwind, nurture yourself regularly, and accomplish what is important to you. Thank you. And we have 2 or 3 minutes. I would be happy to entertain a question or a comment if there is one, if that works, Julie.
Yeah. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, or feel free to type it in the chat and I can ask it for you. During the presentation, we did have a couple questions come through, so I'll ask those first.
Okay.
What are some strategies to stop worrying about others, family and friends, who are not following COVID-19 protocols? What can't control what they do ultimately? So you can't control what they do ultimately. So how do you stop stressing about them?
Okay. I think this is where self-talk is really critical. And it's something like this, that you say, I wish it were different, and I wish everyone took this more seriously. But the only thing that I have within my control is to set a good example, to model the appropriate behavior, and in my presence, ask others to comply. I think we can express our opinions, but we also know that that might not be met, and many times is not, with other people's compliance. So I think then we have to cast it off and say, I've got to put that in the universe's hands, because that's outside of my control.
And then one more question pertaining, and I think you touched on this briefly, but maybe elaborate a little more, pertaining to optimism or positivity. To raise one's positivity, does one need to ignore, neglect seeing the realities of the world? Ignorance is bliss. Stop doom scrolling, looking at all of the news in the world. How can one achieve some positivity in a negative information world?
And I think, yes, the part of the question is answered by the individual who asked it, and that is, I think we've got to limit how much negative we're watching. And I think we have to remember we're being influenced by it. A lot of what we're seeing on the news is not accurate. There's some of it is, and it's hard always to know. Stories change all of the time, but I think we limit the amount of negative exposure we have to all of that. And I think it is about then tuning into positive situations with people, finding out and reading more stories that are inspiring of people who have who have overcome amazing things in this world, looking and seeking out the joyful stories of people. This is a great time of year because usually you can read about people and the inspiring things they do. I think there's so much that is going on, and I hear about it in our little teeny community that we're just really coming to know. And it's virtual, but in years past, they've always had a fund drive for children. And so they're finding other ways to engage around it. And so probably there'll be a Santa drive-by. But I think finding and seeing and looking for those things that are happening in the universe to remind us of all of the good that there is. So look for it, and know that it is there. It is greater. Promote it in your own household and in your own life. And I think the one thing that I attempt to do is limit it by, if all of a sudden something captures me from the news, from something or someone has said something, I take a loose rubber band and I put it around my wrist. And when I catch myself just dwelling on all of the things that are so distressing, I take that rubber band and I snap my wrist in an effort to remind myself I'm stinging myself or hurting myself by this repetitious thinking about how awful everything is. And I know full well it is not that awful. We just don't have the access to hear all the good stories and all the good things as much as we unfortunately have the access to hear all the garbage. So I go looking for it. I seek stories. I ask people about things like, what are you going to do? Or what have you heard? And actually, I think the internet and some of the social media is pretty prolific about telling stories of people and some of the pretty amazing things that are out there. Well, I want to thank you all for joining in today. I'm glad that we could at least get together this way. It'd be fun to be with you in person and to engage, and that's always my favorite way, but I'm glad we could be together today. I wish you all of the best. Stay safe and healthy, and may you have blessed holidays.